Our learning is Leila Nishmas Mindel Maria Vaskal Meruven and Nishama Shem Aliyah. We are on Kuf Mem Vav Amud Aleph. We are up to the Mishnah. This Mishnah is a very, very relevant Mishnah, all about opening different bottles and cans and bags and different things like that on Shabbos. On Shabbos. We're almost done. You almost hit the perfect Shabbos observance, but right at the end. Okay, so a lot of these Gemaras are open to some interpretation based on different considerations. They point out there are numerous prohibitions that we have to deal with when we think about opening anything. We have like makeh patish, which is putting the final step in building anything, right? That final blow. So that's something we have to think about when we open bottles or cans. We have mechatech. Mechatech means making a precise type of cut, which is usually going to be anything that's going to be using a like cutting on a perforation is going to be, or like what are they, when it's not a perforation, but they have that little zip where they let you open it and you pull the rest of it, not zip, like a little snippet, and they let you pull the rest of it. It's also potentially going to be mechatech, a big discussion about how that relates to opening cans and opening other things. Making something into a kli, cutting letters, right? There's a whole bunch of different prohibitions that come into play. So one of the challenges also is trying to understand, ancient practices and how they apply to modern applications. So we'll try our best, and then we'll try to share some practical applications one way or another when we're done. Okay, so shover adam esachavis lechol hemenu grogaros. A person allowed to break open a cask in order to eat the dried figs from it. Okay, so basically you have a cask filled with dried figs, and a person allowed to break the cask which has these dried figs in it, and then they're going to eat it. As long as you don't intend to make a kli. Now, when it says intend over here, it doesn't literally mean that your intention is focused on kavana. It's more about making sure the opening is not like a perfect and precise opening. Okay, so basically we're talking about a basket or cask, and this cask is a reusable type of thing. So if you're going to go ahead and make it into basically you're going to go ahead and make a proper opening, then there's going to be two potential issues over here. One is makeh patish, which is finishing it up. The other is building. You're building it into a proper utensil. So therefore you can't go ahead and make it into like a proper opening. So you're also not allowed to perforate the bung of a cask. What that means is, let's say you have a wine cask. They would have like a hole that was filled with wax, and then you go ahead, and if you want to get the wine out, you go ahead and you make a hole in that wax thing, and through that hole the wine pours out. Dear Rabbi Yehuda, those are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Mecham say there's no problem doing so. Okay, v'lo yikavena mitzida. Everyone agrees you're not allowed to perforate it on its side. We'll see exactly what that means in the Gemara. If the cask already has a hole, you want to plug the hole, you're not allowed to place wax on it because you're smoothing it out. So you're not supposed to use anything like of a wax-like material, which is going to be, you have to like push and smooth it out, because that would be included in a prohibition called mimareach. Okay, this is the same reason you can't use like thick creams on Shabbos. Basically, anytime you're going to be smoothing something, basically rubbing something of a thick substance, that's going to be problematic. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Maisa balifnei Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai ba'Arav. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was in the town of Arav, and the same story happened. Someone wanted to place a plug, wanted to place wax over a hole, and Amar chosheni lo michatas, and Rabbi Yochanan said, I'm afraid that doing so would a person would be liable for a chatas offering. Okay. Amar Rav Oshia, says Rav Oshia about the Gemara, Loshano el Jerusos. The Mishnah, which allows you to break open a barrel, is only talking about pressed figs. Alva mifurados lo. But loose figs, you're not allowed to use a knife or sword to break open their caskets. Okay, so we'll see why he says that in a second. But basically, again, the Mishnah said we're talking about dried figs, and you're allowed to break open the basket, break open the cask in order to get those dried figs. He says that's only when they are pressed together, but if they're loose, if it's just a whole collection of them, then you're not allowed to do so. Ask the Gemara, Mufrados lo. Ones which are loose, you're not allowed to do so. Meisvei, we have a challenge from a brisa. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, maybe Adam es chavish shel yayin, umatiz rosha b'sayif, umnichal pnei orchim b'shabbos v'nechoshesh. Rav Shimon Gamliel says you're allowed to place a cask of wine in front of your guest, and knock off the top, and in order to serve the guest, you have this big cask, and you take a knife, you're allowed to take your sword, and go ahead and cut off the top of it, and the guest will enjoy it. There's no problem. So why over here? So that should be no worse than loose figs. Why is he saying only pressed figs? Yes, loose figs, no. So the Gemara says, no, like this. The Brisa, which said Ramuel says you're allowed to cut off the top of the sword, that is the view of the Rabbanan about muksa. Whereas the Mishnah, our Mishnah, is Rav Nachman. What are we referring to? If you remember way back when, Rav Nachman had a very stringent view, or Nechemi, had a very stringent view when it came to usage of muksa. He held that like a sword or a knife is only allowed to be used for its primary purpose. So he holds a knife or a sword you're allowed to use if it comes to cutting like something like dried figs. That's because that's its primary use. Once you're allowed to use it for its very much primary use, you're allowed to use it also to break open a casket, right? The Rabbanan say no, as long as it's something which is seen as a normal use, even if it's not its primary use, it's allowed. We don't pass like Rav Nechemia. Rav Nechemia has a very, for him, you're only allowed to use a fork to pick up something that you like to eat food. But if you want to use a fork to grab something on the other side of the table, like a napkin, and you want to use your fork to get the napkin, he would hold that's usher. Right? Even though it's also, even though you're not doing anything not allowed, he holds it's only allowed to be used for its primary purpose. And that's why it says Rav Oshia said that our Mishnah, we're talking about pressed figs, because once you're allowed to use the sword or the knife for cutting the pressed figs, once you're allowed to do that, you're also allowed to go ahead and cut the baskets as well. Okay, my duchid Rav Oshia lo ukme masnis Rav Nechemia. Ask the Gemara, why? What's forcing him to say our Mishnahs like Rav Nechemia, uvidrusos and pressed figs? Look me mifurados for Rabbanan. Let him say we're dealing with loose figs, and it follows the opinion of the Rabbanan. So Amarav masnis and kashise, or the wording of our Mishnah indicated that it's Nechemia. Why? My area tani grogaros. Why does the Mishnah say that the cask contains figs? Listening peros, let it just say any produce. Elishmamina bedrusos, it must be, we're talking about a very specific type of figs. Figs are fruits which are oftentimes, specifically in the Mishnah's time, they were oftentimes eaten as like a cake of figs, and therefore the fact that it said figs specifically indicated to him that we're talking about a very particular case, where they are ready, you're going to need your knife for the figs, and that's what pushed him to say it's Rav Nechemia. Okay, bottom line is we don't pass like Rav Nechemia. We say once you're allowed to use a knife for any permitted purpose, and therefore this although the Mishnah is going like Rav Nechemia, we don't pass like that. Tanya Chada. Okay, now we have another contradiction where the ruling of Nechemia is going to be the one that allows us to interpret or make sense of the contradiction. Tanya Chada was taught in one brisa, Chosalo shall grogaros v'shal tamar matir. A person's allowed to untie ropes holding together baskets of dried figs or dates. Okay, so basically what they had is they had like these a bunch of ropes that would tie together. Like you see this sometimes when I'm trying to think of like a similar type of thing. Sometimes you see this, like these thick ropes that hold together like some fruits or hold together some produce, like I don't know, maybe like even like a cheese net, maybe, I don't know, something like that. Basically, they had like these dried figs, and they were sold. Sometimes you had like a rope that tied them together. So the one brisa says you're allowed to untie the ropes. We have to assume it was tied in not a permanent fashion. Or you're allowed to unravel or cut them. The tiny idach, other brisa says, matir avalo mafkiv lochotech. You're allowed to untie them, but you can't unravel or cut them. So one of them allows cutting, one of them doesn't. Lokasha, Harabanan Rav Nechemia. One is the view of the Rabbanan, who say that you're allowed to go ahead and use a knife to cut a rope. That would not be a problem. The other is the view of the Rabbanan, the Tanya Rav Nechemia Omer, afilu tarvad, afilu talis, afilu sakin, even a spoon, a cloak, or a knife, any talent on tzarech tashmish, and you're only allowed to use it for their specialized use. You cannot use it for anything else. Okay, but the bottom line is, according to the Rabbanan, you are allowed to go ahead, certainly when you're breaking open something entirely. So the chosalos is a good example where the poskim point to something which is most similar to our like one-time use type of thing. So if you're using, like you're opening like a package of cookies or something like that, where it's not going to be reused, right? If you open like a box of Oreos, let's say a bag of Oreos, right? So it has the plastic tray and it has like a sleeve. It has the plastic sleeve, and you open that. That is something you will never be able to use again, right? And therefore, according to most poskim, that's going to be fine. You're allowed to open it, and even though you're technically making a utensil there. Right? You're technically making a utensil, but now you're making it usable. But the bottom line is you're not really making it into utensil. Utensil, according to many, is something which is going to be reused. And something which is never going to be reused again is not included in that. It's a matter of some debate, but things of that nature where it doesn't have like any long-lasting use, according to many poskim, it's going to be allowed, and that seems to be the normative minhag. So you could do it in one of two ways. Then the other pieces, you could either open it on the glue that held it together, You didn't really do anything by separating the glue, but you could also, if you need to rip it open, as long as you're not cutting it on a perforation, would be allowed as well. Where it gets a little more interesting, a little more complicated is what about like a metal, like a can of tuna or something? Is that considered making it into a kli? It would seem like it is. That would seem to be more problematic. Certainly, you open it in a way that allows for a utensil to be reused. So some poskim are machmir. Other poskim point out, and certainly this would seem to be the I would say the norm in America, especially since the way we often practice, is that since it's true, technically a person go ahead and wash out their tuna can and go ahead and use it as a cup later in the week. When was the last time you did that? Exactly. So the point is that especially in America, where we're very everything's disposable, we throw everything out. Many poskim are lenient about doing so, and therefore, in terms of making a utensil, many poskim are lenient, saying that's not going to be a problem. Okay.
Does recycling enter into that?
So the fact that it ultimately gets recycled doesn't seem to be enough of a factor to say that you are making it into utensil. Yeah, it's a fair question. Yeah, very fair question. Okay, so Vamini Rav Sheshes. Fine. So bottom line is again. So right now, so far what comes out, at least according to bottom line halacha, is that in a situation where breaking something open is not, we're talking about something which is not going to be used again, not going to be problematic. Not going to be problematic. We haven't really gotten into some cases where, fine, not going to be problematic. Let's go further. What about thrusting into the side of a cask with a spear on Shabbos? Okay, so basically you have a cask and you have a spear and you go ahead and you stick it in the side of it, and now wine's going to pour out. Imagine like this scene out of like some movie or something, but they would do this. It was like a way of of showing their guest and of making a hole. Are you allowed to do it? So the Gemara asks, does the person intend to make a new opening, and therefore it's going to be forbidden? Why is it forbidden? Because basically you're making the finishing touch on the utensil, right, by making a new opening. Or is it just you want to just demonstrate? You're not really making a new hole for the sake of making a new hole and finishing the utensil. It's just a way of showing your guests how generous you are. You're making a hole, and now wine's going to be spouting out, and showing them, look, go ahead and grab and whatever. I'm being generous. It shows how generous I am, and therefore it's not really about making a new hole. Rav Sheshes said, no. Bottom line is you're making an opening, and therefore it's going to be permitted. However, this gets challenged. You're allowed to bring a cask of wine and sever the top of it with a sword. Now, why are you allowed to sever? In one case, you're allowed to sever the top of the sword, and the other case, you're allowed to puncture with a spear. What's the difference between severing the top of the barrel with a sword as opposed to puncturing with a spear? The Gemara says, no, there's a big difference. In the situation where you're cutting off the top, if you're making a huge hole, then clearly you're not really making a hole. You're just chopping off the top. There, you're just showing, I want you to be able to grab as much as you want, right? I'm showing you like it's wide open. Do whatever you want. Take as much as you want. Over here, if I really wanted to go ahead and show you that I'm being generous, what I could have done is taken off. There is that wax hole, and instead of taking off that wax hole, the person goes ahead and makes another hole next to it. What you really should have done, just take off the wax hole, which is a larger hole than the spear hole, and that would have demonstrated that you're just being generous. The fact that you go ahead and just make a small hole with a spear, that is limiting. So basically what we're saying, again, I can't bring a perfect correlation. I don't know, this halacha is not used so much, as far as I remember, to extrapolate, modern halacha, but the bottom line is, again, let's think of the barrel. The barrel has an existing hole covered with wax. Okay, you usually have a little hole in that wax hole, and that's where the wine comes out. So if I go ahead and make a big chop off on the top, we say I'm not making a hole. What I'm doing is I'm demonstrating that I want to show you I'm being as generous as possible. It's not about, granted, people are going to now use it, et cetera, but it's not really a hole. It's more of a show, as opposed to if I go ahead and I put a spear in it, I'm actually making a smaller hole than the existing holes that exist. If I'm putting a spear through it, what it sounds like is I'm actually going ahead and making a new hole. In which case, it's makeh b'patish. I'm finishing up. I'm creating something, I'm adding a new opening, which is going to be problematic. What I could have done, if I really wanted to show him generous, in that case, then I could have just taken off the wax cover, and that would have already had a bigger hole because the wax, right? But if I'm making a really big hole, then I can't say, I could have just taken off the wax cover, because the big hole that I'm making on the top with the knife, with the sword, is actually much larger than that. So if I'm making a smaller hole than the existing potential holes, then that's usher. If I'm making a bigger hole, that's going to be allowed. Okay, what the parallel case is in our modern applications, I'm not 100% sure. Okay, says the Gemara further. I'm not allowed to perforate the bung. The bung, again, is like this wax, which is on the side of the caskets. You're not allowed to perforate it, according to Rav Yehuda. The Chum say you're allowed to. Amar Rav Huna, machlokas lamala. Rav Huna said, we'll see a machlokas about where this bung is. So Rav Huna says machlokas lamala. The machlokas is about at the top of the bung. If I make it on the side, if I'm puncture on the side, everyone's going to agree it's aser. Because fine. And that's what it means in the Mishnah. The Mishnah, if you remember, we had a line, lo yikavena mitzida, you shouldn't perforate it on its side. Rav Chisda Omer machlokas minatzad. The machlokas is on the side. Aval gaba divrei kol mutter. At the top, everyone agrees is permitted because that's not the best place to make a hole. Meaning, if you want to get wine out of your barrel, the best place to make the hole is on the side, because the bottom or the side, meaning on the side of the casket, ideally further lower. Making on the top is going to be much more permissive, and that's why both opinions are going to be more permissive. Whether you say the machlokas is on the top and one allows it, one doesn't allow it, or everyone agrees on the top. The point is the top is much less problematic because it's not the typical place that you're going to be pouring wine out of. You typically, when you think of a casket, you make you make a cask, you make the hole on the side, and that's where you bring out the liquid. Okay, and that the Mishnah said, and if everyone holds that, how do you, according to Rav Chisda, who says machlokas on the side, how do you interpret the Mishnah which said you're not allowed to perforate it on its side? Hasam megufa dechavis. There you're talking about making a hole in the body of the cask and not in the cap. In the cap is where the machlokas is, but everyone agrees in the way Rav Chisda is learning it that you can't actually make a hole in the cask itself. Okay, let's go a little bit further, and then we'll try to also pull together some practical halachos out of all these different cask halachos. Tan Rabbanan, a nokvin nekev chadash b'Shabbos. You want to make a new hole in a vessel on Shabbos. Okay, v'mbala hosef mosef. But if you want to enlarge an already hole, an existing hole, you're allowed to do so. V'yesh omer emosifin. There are those who say you're not allowed to enlarge a hole. V'shavin shenokvin nekev yashin lechatchila. All agree that you're allowed to reopen an old hole. Okay, so any hole that already exists, you're allowed to go ahead and reopen. That everyone's going to agree, and that's why something which is already a hole, like for example a plastic cap on top of a bottle of soda. So there, it's a hole that existed, right? The hole there's a hole, right? And then basically they came along and they put something on top of it. So the opening, there's no opening a hole over there. The issue over there, everyone's going to agree, there's no issue of opening a hole because the hole existed. You're not making a brand new Pesach for it. It would have always had a hole. It just was covered, and then you took that cover off. So therefore, in terms of taking it off, that's not going to be problematic. The only question is the plastic that you now took off, is that creating a utensil in and of itself? That little cap, right? Meaning regarding the bucket, regarding the bottle, everyone agrees that since there was a hole already, the thing already had a hole, and then they put a hole on top, and then they covered it. You're just reopening an old hole, no problem. The question is the plastic thing which you just took apart from the what's it called, from the ring. Is that going to be problematic or not? Many will say that since it's plastic, it's not going to be problematic. Where it's metal, many poskim will say that granted it's not something we typically use, but at the end of the day, you just created something which was unusable. It was as a plastic, as a utensil, and again, even though we don't necessarily use it, you just created a utensil, and therefore it's going to be problematic, and therefore many are machmir about opening metal screw tops for that reason. There is what's relied upon, but many are machmir for that reason. Okay, fine. Yeah, good. Sorry.
Opening beer on Shabbos, so that's not because it's a little bit of a metal top.
No, so metal top. So there, it's not separating from anything else, right? Opening a metal, that would be a good example of this. And if the word's permitted, in other words, there you have a beer. The top is 100%. There's a hole, and then the hole gets covered, right? So then when I unscrew it, right?
Not in the beer. If you open a pop top,
No, you're talking about a glass bottle. Yeah, it's a glass bottle. It had a hole, right? And then the hole was covered, right? And then when I take off the cap, I'm just reopening an old hole, and therefore that's not a problem.
a pop top can.
Like a can. A can.
You go,
That was called a pop top can. I never heard that term.
That's what I used to call them when
Okay.
they made them.
The first I wasn't around then. Okay. I'm just messing. What's it called? Yeah, so that there gets much more problem. Not because of so everyone agrees you throw the can out. The problem over there is something called mechatech. Mechatech by a can, there because of the fact that it's a perfect, like it's open in a very precise fashion, there many poskim are machmir.
Well, not only is it open in a precise fashion, but the can, there's no hole there until
Right.
you open it.
So there's two issues, and one issue we could get around. One issue I think is easier to get around. One issue is harder to get around. In terms of there was no opening before, and therefore it's like this. It's like opening a new thing. Some will say, okay, but since it's a disposable thing, it's not really you're not really creating a kli, right? What's the whole point over here? There's makam patish on a kli. but it's not a kli, it's not a utensil. It says, what am I going to do when I finish with it? Throw it out, or even recycle it. But bottom line is, I'm done with it. I'm done. And therefore, when it comes to makav v'pashur, creating a kli, maybe it's not even a kli because it's disposable. It's something, if I would keep it, it'd be another story. But we're throwing these things out. So therefore, that is easier to get around. What is more problematic is that since the opening is opened in a very precise fashion, in other words, it's shaped in a specific fashion to allow a certain amount of flow, and therefore the argument is that it's much more akin to opening something on perforations, right, which is going to be problematic. If you open in a destroyed fashion, it's one thing. So if you go somehow, if you go ahead and you want to chop off the top of your can, totally fine.
But what's the difference between that and the bottle?
So the bottle already, the hole already existed, right? Over here, you're creating a hole and you're cutting it precisely, right? So opening a can, to me, I would find, opening a can and opening the metal tops, those are going to be the more problematic ones. There's what's relied upon in both those. But opening a can and screwing off the top, the metal top, there's no issue of making a hole over there, but there is the issue of making the cap into a utensil, right? And with opening a can, the issue over there again is that mechatich, because it's a very precise hole. If it's a situation where the only way to get the hole is not about a precise hole. So for example, they distinguish between that and opening a can of tuna, right? Opening a can of tuna, it's just like you're taking off the whole top. So it's not about a precise hole that's being made so you could drink it in a very precise way. It's just like, okay, I'm taking the whole thing off. But when it's being cut, it sounds very similar, right? But when it's a cut that's being cut in a very particular way so that I could use it in a functional fashion, that's where more poskim take much more issue. So opening a can, because of that, again, there's what's relied upon. Some say, no, at the end of the day, this is the only way I could open it. So therefore, it's not really mechatich. Okay, fine. But bottom line is that's much more questionable. Okay. Fine, let's go further. Tanakama. Okay, so Tanakama, Maishna Minek of Chadash Delo. Why does the Tanakama allow enlarging a hole but not making a new hole? So Gemara says to come Misak and Pischa. Mosufe Nami Kam Misak and Pischa. The reason you can't make a new one is because you are fixing. You're fixing something. So also when I'm adding, I'm also fixing. Amarava Dvar Torah Shakol Pesach. So here we have an interesting source for all hole making. Amarava Dvar Torah Shakol Pesach Shena Asu Lahachnis Lotzi Eno Pesach. Biblically speaking, any hole which is not made for bringing things out and bringing things in is not really considered a hole. Okay, again, I want to just remind us that there's like 6 different isurim that we're focusing on. So right now we're focusing specifically on making an opening, and the focus is, and they're saying when it comes to making an opening, the only midah, we're not talking mechatech. Mechatech is its own issue, but it's nothing to do with making an opening. It's about precision cutting, which we spoke about a moment ago. We're not speaking about over here, but now we're saying in terms of the isser making a hole on Shabbos, which is makbeh patish, that's only a hole which something could go in and something go out. Now, your typical hole on a typical, if you're opening a hole on a casket, what's the function of the hole, right? Is it to allow things in? No, it's only to allow things out. So certainly, midoraisa, based on what we're about to see, what we just started seeing, there's no making a hole on Shabbos is only a hole that allows that's meant for things to go in and meant for things to go out, right? So any hole which is not made for both in a Pesach is not really an opening, and therefore a person's not liable for creating a hole. However, there's a decree when it comes because of a chicken coop. Because a chicken coop, when a person makes a hole in a chicken coop, the function of that hole is both to bring air in and to take harmful vapors out. Right? You want to bring air in so the chickens could breathe, and you want to and it gets very, very smelly. Anyone who ever spent time on a farm, could tell you it'd be very, very smelly over there, and therefore you want to get the harmful vapors out. Vimbala hosif mosif, and if a person wants to go ahead and add osufe vadai, sufe. So when it comes to adding, typically a person's not going to make the hole larger in a chicken coop. That's not what you do. In a chicken coop, you just make a little hole. So mishum recha, so you dafka wouldn't make, we're now on Kufman Vavam Vez, you dafka wouldn't make a larger hole by a chicken coop, because if you do so, what's going to happen? Then rodents are going to come in and start killing off the chickens. So, but if the whole source of this prohibition is a lul shatana golim, you only make small holes. And making the hole larger is never going to come into account. And that's what the Tanakama says. So all holes you can make because of this decree of lul shatana golim of the chicken coop. So when it comes to making a hole, that's going to be a problem. And because of this decree of the lul shatana golim, even though our hole in the bucket, in the cask, is only for allowing things to come out, but it's a decree based on the chicken coop. But in terms of largening a hole, you never do that by a chicken coop. Why would you ever do that? Because you never want to make it larger. You want to keep it small. V'yesh omrim emosif, and however, the second Tana says you're not allowed to add. Why? Zimnim lo sakne mikara, vasla v'chebe. It's true. Typically, you don't to make them large, but it's possible that that since you made a hole, you made it in an incorrect fashion, and therefore you're going to go ahead and enlarge it, and therefore you're also not to enlarge holes on a regular cask, and that's the rationale behind the Tana who holds that you're not allowed to make a hole even larger once it was made. George Menachem Shmuel Yochanan, halacha yeshrom, the halacha is that you cannot even expand an existing hole on Shabbos. We'll pick up and learn some more practical halachos about this tomorrow. Have a great day.